Hello everyone. This lesson is going to explore something called the academic system. And it covers a period of about 100 years, from the mid-1700s to the mid-1800s. So this is just at the waning of the Baroque period. During this time, art in Europe was ruled by something called the academic system. And this system set very specific standards for what was acceptable in a painting. Now, this was a time of great excesses in the French court, under very powerful kings who held absolute control over the masses. This lasted until the masses actually revolted in the French Revolution of 1789, and that sort of changed everything. So originally, the French Academy was formed by King Louis XIV's finance minister, and he made the academy to ensure that the arts reflected the regime's interest. In other words, art that was too subversive or too political was not acceptable. These academic systems were established strict rules for subject matter and technique in painting. And eventually the English came up with their own academy. Now, in order for an artist of the time to be financially successful, they really did have to be accepted into the yearly salon, or big art show. And this salon was sponsored by the Academy. Now, the salon generally accepted only men, with a very few exceptions for women, like women you could count on one hand. And these people that were accepted had to have been trained at expensive academic schools. So really, in order to be a successful artist, a person had to be an upper-class white male who was willing to abide by rigid academic standards. Now, one of the real famous artists of the period is the artist William Bouguereau. He's also featured on the main page of our class. You know, he's one of the best-known academic painters, and he served on the jury for the Paris Salon. And the jury means the people who pick who gets in and who does not. In his work, there's no visible brushstrokes whatsoever. It's finished with a painstaking polish, and it is in fact quite beautiful. But it's important to remember that it is only one way of creating a work of art. You know, once you get a painting so perfect, where in the world do you go from there? How do you get better? How does it continue to evolve? Well, what happened is it eventually evolved in a sort of devolution of realism, and with that we'll look at the Impressionist period. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's next week. We're going to look at the academic system today. The time in Europe prior to the French Revolution was one of indulgent excesses in the aristocracy. There was heavy taxation of the middle classes and extreme poverty in the lower classes. One style that was born of this time is called Rococo. Now, it came from the Baroque style, but it's much more stylized and flamboyant. You know, what Rococo really means is, think about if you've ever been to Florida or to a really touristy area, and you might go, and let's use the Florida example. So maybe you're in Panama City Beach or something, and you go into a little knick-knack store, and you see all these kind of hoobles and hobbles made out of seashells. You know, like a duck with plastic feet made out of seashells. That's Rococo. I mean, what it means is like little kitschy stuff. So this piece on the left is by the artist Fronard, and it was commissioned by, get this, the last mistress of Louis XV. Now, Louis XV was the guy who was beheaded in the Revolution. This painting is of two lovers meeting in a secret tryst, and it was actually rejected by the mistress of Louis XV who commissioned it. This is probably why it survived the Revolution. Because what happened during the French Revolution is people were so angry that anything that symbolized the rich and aristocratic way of life was destroyed. So a lot of art was destroyed. But, you know, a lot of other art came forth as a result of the revolution. Now, the painting on the right is by Tiepolo, and it shows a royal wedding. What I want you to notice, and I'm not sure if you can see it very well here, is that the arch above the wedding is actually made of plaster. It kind of comes out from the wall. and that would be a typical example of Rococo. One of the groups that was active in the French Revolution was called the Jacobins. Now they claimed to hold very democratic views. You know, they were also responsible for what we call the Reign of Terror, in which thousands of people were killed, and many of them by the guillotine. Under the leadership of Robespierre, this group dominated the French Assembly, and they ruthlessly executed all of their opponents, which doesn't sound too democratic to me. Now, whether these opponents were from the fallen aristocracy or even their own fellow revolutionaries. In 1793, the Jacobins commissioned the artist Jacques David to paint a tribute to one of their slain leaders, Jean-Paul Marat. Now, Jean-Paul Marat had been a radical pamphleteer, which means he left pamphlets everywhere to help fuel the revolution. And he'd been partially responsible for the riots in 1792, in which hundreds of prisoners were killed. Now, he suffered from a skin condition, so he conducted much of his business from a medicinal bath. And it was here that the young woman, Charlotte Corday, attacked him with a knife and fled. Now, this piece is an example of what we call neoclassical style, meaning a new classical. So, unlike the Rococo, which is very dramatic and exaggerates things, here the artist has shown the stillness of the aftermath in a quiet statement about death. Now, it's interesting to note that this particular painting has been copied and parodied countless times. So you may see it again, like there's one of a guy sitting in a car, like a gangbanger sort of guy, in an old, I don't know, 66 Impala or something, in exactly this same position. Now, by the end of the 18th century, I invite you to consider what was going on, you know, in Europe. So industrial manufacturing had begun, and this was a big deal. The visionaries of the time believed that the new goods produced in factories would not only expand the middle class, because workers were paid well to produce the goods, but also that all the classes would have a better material existence. This development, along with the revolutions in both France and the United States, led to a period called the Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment continued the theories of the humanists of the Renaissance, but what distinguished the views of the Enlightenment was the optimistic view that humanity and its institutions could actually be perfected. So, you know, the humanists of the Renaissance, they put forth the ideal. And the Enlightenedness, or those that believed in the Enlightenment, they felt like we are going to move into this ideal. We're going to live, you know, without suffering and without crime and in a more perfect moral existence. Now, one of the big followers of the Enlightenment was our own Mr. Thomas Jefferson. And it was as a result of these beliefs that the revolution was actually founded. So it brought a lot of benefit. Now here we have two paintings by Joshua Reynolds, and he was the first head of the English Academy, who again judged paintings on their merit and on their sort of political correctness. Now there was a lot of painting in this style about morals, and these two reflect these stories of antiquity. Now on the left we have these three sisters that are adorning the god of marriage. And on the right is an actress and her tragic muse. It's a little bit hard to see here, but the muse looks a little bit like a unicorn and is over her right shoulder. It's kind of a scary creature, actually. So maybe that means that the creative pursuits and definitely the role of the actress was rather suspect. Now, the sisters are adorning the god of marriage because these kind of the role of motherhood in this idealized existence was held up as a very high standard for people to attain to. Now, women were given a few more freedoms in the Age of Enlightenment, but there was a prevailing belief that their natural place was in the home. One acceptable subject for women to paint was floral still lifes. And we have a great example by Rachel Roish. Flowers were seen to symbolize the transient nature of life. Now let's look at the one on the right because I think it totally rocks. This is Adelaide Guillard, and she's with two pupils, which she submitted this to the 1785 Salon. So prior to painting this, it was rumored that, oh my gosh, a woman cannot paint like that. Her work is actually done by a man. So in order to counter those rumors, she painted herself in a very nice dress. I mean, I'm telling you, I would not wear a dress like that to paint in, but she did. Miss Adelaide had some style. And not only that, she put behind her in her painting the next generation of women painters. I gotta love this lady. She really knew how to make a statement, and she had a sass about her that was probably, you know, a little tough at the time. So another artist that broke the barriers against women in the arts was Angelica Kauffmann. She was born in Switzerland, but she trained in Italy and was invited to England in 1766 by a British client. And then she became one of the two women among the founding members of the British Royal Academy. Her specialty was what they call neoclassical historic style, which simply means painting scenes from history in a way that has a classical look. But there was always a kind of a morality lesson or a tale. Here on the left we have a scene from ancient Rome called Cornelia Pointing to Her Children as Her Treasures. So on the right of the left-hand painting is a woman who is showing off her jewels to Cornelia. And Cornelia is saying basically, I don't need jewels because my children are my jewels. Okay, so that's pretty sweet. And then we have the example of what we call a good mother painting. That's what this one is. On the left, on the right, is the poet and her muse. Notice the tranquil grace and the subdued lighting of the characters on both of these. Now these two paintings are by the artist Thomas Gainsborough, and they show the idealized romantic images that were really common in this period. I mean, they're sweet, and to me, quite honestly, they're a little oversweet. Now above is a picture of his two daughters, and they actually both grew up to be very mentally unstable. One was eventually committed to an asylum, and the left is a poor shepherd girl. I want you to notice the broken pitcher. Now this is an odd thing because the pitcher is used to, there's a lot of symbolism in this style of art, and the pitcher represents a girl's virtue, right? If the pitcher is broken, uh-oh, you know what? She's probably no longer as virtuous as one would like for an unmarried girl. So here we have a very, very young girl whose pitcher is just a little bit broken, which I think that's odd. Anyway, that's the painting. It leaves pause. But this symbolism is something that was very prevalent, so he was definitely making a statement in this case. You know, I'm not just kind of making that up. The pictures have a big meaning. Let's look at another one these are called genre paintings, and they're pretty fun. So this is like following along the line of the cracked pictures. This one's really funny to look at. It's called a genre painting, or a painting that portrays a scene from daily life. Now I want you to look at this carefully. Notice that there's cracked eggs. So there's kind of cracked eggs all over the floor. She's dropped her eggs, and it has basically the same meaning as the cracked jug. The girl is remorseful, and the guy is trying to kind of get out the door and talk his way out of it. Notice how the mother or the older woman has him by the wrist, and she is not letting him go. And the very fun part is to notice on the right side, that little boy who's looking like, oh man, this is a mess. That's Cupid. And he shot his arrow in such a way that caused the girl to break the eggs, and, you know, it is an ancient story. So this ends part 1. And part 2 is next. Thanks for listening.